Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing Tohaa versus Spiral Core, and the scenario is Acquisition. I wanted to play Biotech 4, but apparently that isn't a normal scenario for normal people, and so we're playing something a bit more standard instead. Now, to preface this video, I want to just mention that this is specifically a video in response to a really interesting question posed by one of the channel supporters, which was to see how many impetuous activations I could fit into a list and still have the list playable. This was from Rob from Brisbane, and they note that this is what they have considered something that's kind of dubious logic, but they're interested in seeing basically how much impetuous can you actually make use of. He notes that O12 with Varangians and Hippolytas as a smokescreen for Diggers and Hellblazers, combined army with Datarazi, Tiger, and MSV Charantid, or his personal favorite, Cosmoflot with Bears, Varangians, Ermandine, and Wallace, all to make them regular, are places where he has seen lots of irregulars. Now, firstly, just to address that, because it's a really interesting point, I find it's a perspective that's less and less common these days, but particularly back in N3, and even now occasionally, you will see someone post a list somewhere and be like, hey guys, this is a 27 order list, what do you think? And you'll look at it and you'll be like, I'm counting 11 regular orders, 4 irregular. Oh, you've put 4 Guangxi and 4 Shaolin monks and like yeah, nine impetuous. Yep, that's a 27 order list, all right. We'll put it on the fridge, and your mum and I are just going to be so proud. I'm going out to get cigarettes. And I always have kind of a negative response to that because it is at best kind of lazy thinking, right? Impetuous activations are not full orders. And at worst, it's kind of what I would call like Reddit thinking, where you're just posting this up for the spectacle, for the big number. It's not really something that is actually going to do what you're claiming that it's doing. It's just there for the sort of like the visual spectacle or the claim. This is a big number list, not actually a list that is good and useful and will do the things that you want. And from that, it's very easy for new players in particular to draw conclusions that are actually quite misleading. Now, that said, are impetuous orders not a resource? No, they absolutely are, and often they're very useful. In the post that he made, Rob mentioned a number of cases where actually impetuous orders can be used to great effect to be almost as, or occasionally as effective as, full regular orders. My personal favorite is one that he mentioned, which is combining Datarazi with Tiger creatures, where the goal is to accelerate Tiger creatures toward your opponent's deployment zone in the impetuous phase and then immediately begin spending orders of them. And so what you do is you position Datarazi not to enter line of fire of the enemy. In fact, they may not even leave your deployment zone, but they will make safe 4-inch movements that they'll then use to throw smoke, and that smoke will cover the impetuous advance of the Tiger creatures and get them into the midfield. And so, you can do that multiple times in the same list, and each time you do, you're using 2 impetuous activations to get about the effect of 1 really solid order. You can also use the impetuous orders on Datarazi to throw smoke for Charantids, although I find that if you do that, you often then just have to spend an order setting the Datarazi back down again so that they don't get shot in your next reactive turn. Another personal favorite use case for the use of impetuous orders is in Vanilla Hack Islam, where I'll use Saladin to reserve a Fadei and then Zamira Narazova, and I'll use the fact that she's being reserve dropped to put Zamira down impetuous in a safe place where she can potentially make a 14-inch move to set up very early in the turn a very dangerous berserk. And particularly by using her as a reserve drop, that's more and more practical, which means that I'm actually going to be using the impetuous order really as a full order, but it requires that setup. It requires that consideration, the fact that she's going to be one of my reserve drops. You need to be actually quite, kind of ironically, you need to be quite careful and thoughtful with how you position your impetuous troops to get maximal use out of them. And often, over the course of any given game, if you get even some solid use out of a series of impetuous activations, that's quite a good outcome. Are they the same as a regular order? No, they're absolutely not. In fact, they are even further down the continuum than an irregular order is. They are one of the least flexible and most conditional resources that we have, but they are a resource. And I think Rob from Brisbane fully understands this. That's why he calls this dubious logic. But so in that spirit, in the spirit of engaging with this, I went through a number of lists and I actually settled on Tohaa, not because it strictly meets the challenge of putting in as much impetuous as possible, although the first draft of this list did have 8 impetuous activations, but because I think it's an interesting showcase in how you might choose to maximize the productive use of impetuous orders, because that's the real that's the real underlying question here, is how much can you actually make regular orders into, so impetuous orders into true regular orders. And I think Tohaa, with things like McCall, which throw eclipse smoke, for example, and can be very dangerous, Tohaa are one of the factions that can actually make surprisingly occasional full use, like full productive use of impetuous activations, and they get to have their cake and eat it too, because everything in their faction, basically all of the McCalls I'm taking, are linkable, which means that you can suppress the impetuous characteristic of those troopers at will, for example, for defense. And so with that in mind, we have this list on screen here. Now, this is a deviation from the first version of the list I wrote, which really was trying to fit as many impetuous activations into a list as I could. The first version of this list had not just 6 McCalls, but it also had 2 Krakots, which gives us 8 impetuous troopers in total. I did try to also fit Kendrat in there for a 9th impetuous activation, but it was a bridge too far. Just all of those pieces are very cheap, like it's literally 13 and 14 point pieces across the board. I think I even went to 10, so I went to 10 impetuous activations if I chose to make a Red Fury Biker impetuous, which I rarely would. So theoretically 10 was the best that I could do, which in a Tohaa list is, in fact in any list, that's not bad. But we've trimmed it back to this just in terms of like actually practical. Because it turns out that once you commit to 6 McCalls into a list, you've got very limited additional room to move in terms of making the list functional. So what we have in Combat Group 1 are 3 McCalls with DACCWs. Those will be linked with the intention of breaking the links fairly regularly to get impetuous activations. Then a Sukhwel HMG, a Tagma Breaker Combi Rifle, and a Kael'ta. The Kael'ta in this case is some close assault in that Sukhwel link, although the Sukhwel having those breaker pistols makes it quite capable at just doing close assault by itself. We then have a second link, a Sukhwel HMG, a Takwheel Combi Rifle Chain of Command, and another Kael'ta, then a Kerael Preceptor, and in Combat Group 2 we have 3 more linked McCalls, a Takwheel Lieutenant with +1 order, and a Diplomatic Delegate as a specialist, and another Ferroware piece. So some things that we are cutting. This list has got very few of the irregular troops I would usually take in Tohaa, and it has fewer guns than I would usually take in Tohaa, but that's because I'm taking 6 McCalls, and that puts certain preconditions on a list. Now, as noted, if you wanted to fit even more impetuous into this list, you can cut the Diplomatic Delegate and the Kerael Preceptor to add in things like 2 Krakot Renegades, and that will even free up some points to turn that Tagma officer into something like a Sakiel paramedic. I think that at that point is exactly 300 points, and that gives you 8 impetuous activations in a list. It becomes more difficult. You can theoretically fit more after that. You can do things like Kendrat and a Biker, which could get you up to 10 impetuous activations, but those pieces, even Kendrat, are all ultimately like kind of cheap, and it becomes difficult just to physically have, like, to physically spend your 300 points. So this is ultimately not fully leaning into the question of how many impetuous activations can you put into a list, but it is a really earnest attempt to explore how productively in Tohaa can we use impetuous activations. Now, playing into this, we have Ed from Canberra's Spiral, and Ed is experimenting with a few different things here, but basically what I would describe this list as is, Ed, we're just going to play some Tohaa, basically. And what that means is that we have 2 very credible triads and 1 very credible support triad. And how Ed described this to me actually when he was talking about the list is basically to really fully divorce himself from the last of what I would call Tricor thinking. So back when Tricor was a good skill rather than almost not useless, but very not particularly good, which is how it is now, Tricor was so useful that you would find yourself in Spiral Core really building around your Tricor options. And that would kind of mean that you didn't typically explore how many Tohaa style links you could put into a list, despite the fact that you were a Tohaa style sectoral. And so what Ed has done here is, I mean, there are a number of like very interesting and clever things, but this is really just, no, we're going to have 3 good quality triads, and that's going to be Combat Group 2. And so to have a look at that, what we have is we have Nima Sitar, Spitfire, Nanopulsar, Viral Pistol, etc. Very serviceable troop. Kusail Engineer with K1 Combi Rifle, and then a Kriegel Breaker Combi Rifle, Smoke Grenade Launcher. What this means is that in one list, in one Haris team, we have decent close assault, so Nima can handle that with a linked Viral Pistol, Nanopulsar, Spitfire, and her CC. We have anti-tag firepower in the form of the Crucial Engineer. We have a Specialist in the form of the Crucial Engineer, who is whip 14. And we have Smoke and Ferroware in the form of the Kriegel Agent. And then in a similar vein, the next link is we have a Dral AP Marksman Rifle Mine Layer with Shock Mines, a Corcel Engineer with a Boarding Shotgun, so there's your Close Assault and your Specialist, and then a Kriegel Agent. So again, you've got your Ferroware and you've got your linked Smoke. Then we have a Tagma MSV2 with Viral Sniper Rifle, a Tagma Lieutenant, who in this case will be pretending to be a Kumatel Bioengineer, and a Kael'tar Light Shotgun. This is strictly a support team because that Lieutenant can't really afford to die, there's no backup, but they will be hanging out in the rear with the gear with that sniper rifle. To support all of that, in Combat Group 1, we have 2 Helot Militiamen with submachine guns like rocket launchers, a Diplomatic Delegate, a Chaxa, a Cowrie Sentinel Paramedic with the Burst 2, Burst 2 Medikit with EM mines and a combi rifle, and then, and this was the spicy pick in addition to like everything else in the list, which I quite like, a Clipsos boarding shotgun. Now, I read from how Ed deployed his list and the pieces that were missing. I was like, okay, there's a Clipsos hanging out in the wing somewhere. And I kind of just made the assumption, given the scenario, that it was going to be a Clipsos with combi rifle and forward observer. This will become relevant later. So here's the table that we're playing. As a slight deviation from how I would usually take these photographs, in this instance, this is my deployment zone here, facing toward Ed. The reason for that is that we were playing on a long table and it just wasn't quite practical for me to get around to either side. This is a glass window here, so really I had to take the photographs from this angle, but that's fine, it's okay to do that occasionally. Now, I won the lieutenant role, and I elected to go first, not because I wanted to. In fact, acquisition is a scenario where you can make very reasonable cases for preferring to go first or second. Depending on the list that you're playing, the scenario caters to that very, very well. I chose to go first, despite the fact that I would have been much more comfortable going second, because I wanted to really put the impetuous potential of those McCall through their paces. If I had gone second, the plan would have been to have hunkered down behind 6 linked heavy flamethrowers and my Ferroware and my Symbiomates and my Symbio Beasts and just said, come at me, bro. Just fight me. I will endure this for 3 turns and then smoke my way onto the objectives. And you can't stop me doing that because I have, depending on how you count it, 9 to 11 models capable of putting down smoke in some capacity if you count the Symbio bombs. But it's 9 models with smoke if you don't. Playing that way means that I just don't ever have to fight Helots if I don't particularly want to. In fact, I don't have to fight if I don't particularly want to. I can just trim whatever Ed attacks me with and then make a rush onto the scenario in the last turn, which this is very capable of. And the main advantage of that as an approach is that I don't have to fight Helots, and I never want to fight Helots if I don't have to. But doing that would mean that I would probably never break the links on the McCalls, possibly for the entire game. So, in order to put myself in a situation where, no, I actually had to use the Impetuous Orders, had to play the list the way I'd planned to, I chose to go first, and so Ed set up second on the table side, on this table side over here. So how I've deployed is kind of similar to how you would expect Combined Army to deploy if they wanted to do that Tiger Rush that I described, where I have the McCalls set up for overlapping support as they impetuous forward. Now, quick note, we are playing this table in a slightly unusual configuration where the goal is to have lots of interior spaces. So no rooftops, these buildings are all infinitely tall. The interior spaces are see into or out of but not through. So for example, if you are in this room here, you can see into the next room, but you can't see out into this space here. You'd need to move into the next room to see that. And the windows are what we call muddy windows, which means that they block line of fire unless you are in contact with them, at which point you can see and be seen. This makes this a very closed table in some respects. There are still plenty of fire lines, like along here, and like this, there's a long one along here, and you can see over this tank relatively reasonable with Silhouette 2 models, which means that there's, for example, a long fire lane there to there. But this is broadly a fairly close-in table, and I did that kind of intentionally because I wanted to give this list the best chance that I could to at least be able to perform. And frankly, this was no slight on how Ed was going to play, because Ed is very good at playing this kind of close-in game. He's going to have as much Ferroware as I am, so he's not going to be hampered in the least by this, and in fact we would see some truly excellent Helot deployments making maximal use of the space and shapes that were available. So in terms of the QAZ creatures for this scenario, Ed's is down behind this building, mine is here. So both of these QAZ creatures really are locking down this central building, which is where the main objective is. The other objectives are here inside this building and in a nook down here, which would be relatively approachable. Ed has picked this side for a couple of reasons. Firstly, this objective is easy to get to. Secondly, there is one more like entry space into this building, whereas I'm going to have to move in through this door here, or like all the way around for this door here. So Ed is the only one that can easily access the interior of this building just directly from his deployment zone without having to move as far forward. And then finally, there are some very nice helot positions. So Ed is going to end up deploying one helot here and one helot here, which uses really like full effect of the 24-inch range band of the helots without ever getting them outranged, which we'll get to when we look at his deployment. So I've set the McCalls up, as I mentioned, to do mutual and overlapping support. So on this flank over here, we have one McCall here behind this building, one McCall here prone behind that planter bed, and one McCall here. And the goal is that under any circumstance, basically, I have a relatively clean movement forward. So for example, this McCall is going to move forward here, which would let him throw smoke in this direction if he needed to, which would potentially let me get smoke down here if this McCall was threatened. Likewise, I could move this McCall first around here, which would let me throw smoke there, which would let me move this McCall forward if I thought that there were shots coming from this direction. And in the same vein on the other flank, I have a McCall, let's see, here, one is here and one is here. So I can move this one out to throw smoke either in this direction or in this direction to get smoke down, say, here or here, if I need to be able to open up space. This McCall can do the same thing, throw smoke in this direction or this direction, and then this McCall is moving relatively aggressively forward. So Ed responds to that. Otherwise, I've got one link team on either flank. So we've got a Sukhwheel HMG and Takwheel link team over here. The other Sukhwheel link team is over here. I have deployed the Tagma schema pretending to be Alis Kisan, which Ed immediately just looked at me and was like, "That's a Takwheel, isn't it?" You don't know that. Could be Alis Kisan. I take her occasionally. No, it was Tagma schema, and Ed knew it immediately. My other Takwheel officer is over here, ready to support these teams. Finally, as my reserve drop, the Preceptor would come down here because I felt it had the best chance of these boxes, right? This is the table edge here. So to move around this space, I was going to need a mobility skill, and I felt like the Preceptor would give me basically a reasonable shot at moving aggressively through that space if I was otherwise locked down by something like, say, a mine. So in Ed's case, the main thing to note is that we have this very scary defensive setup where we have a helot and then a prone Kriegel agent next to it, and then a helot and a prone Kriegel agent next to it. Now these helots are never going to be locked out of good range. 24 inches carries them very nicely to here and to here. They are pinning me back in my deployment zone. Normally I would advise against using helots to do that, but Ed has correctly determined that I'm going to attempt to rush him with McCalls, and so he is trying to stop me from taking impetuous orders. If I do close in, he has Ferroware to defend, and there's also a diplomatic delegate down here, which means that basically this much space of the table is covered by Ferroware arrows. That's also part of why the Preceptor team deployed here, because there was the potential to maybe circumvent that Ferroware zone, but he is pretty much blanketing his entire deployment zone. Otherwise, we have Nima down here. We have just a variety of other pieces. The Dral would deploy here with its mine down here. There's a Coastal Engineer on each flank. And then setting up for a Tagma Sniper Reserve drop is the link team pieces there. So we have the Tagma Lieutenant and then the Poker Master here. But Ed, as soon as I deploy these Symbio Beasts, Ed pops his Sniper down here instead. He has to reshuffle the links to make that work. But the goal is to have basically all of this space covered by the Sniper. So there's not really any way for me to easily get the Symbio Beast forward on turn 1, which is sensible. So in the face of these hard ARO pieces, I am already kind of not feeling this entire game plan. This is one of the things that you can do to stop impetuous activations from being true orders, right? Is you put hard AROs in place that makes your opponent reluctant to spend those impetuous orders for risk of just throwing away the piece. Impetuous models can't take cover, which means they're often very susceptible to hard AROs, just gunfire coming their direction. Now, I do choose to break each of these two links because, damn it, we are leaning into this playstyle, and I'm actually going to take an impetuous activation with this Krakot over here, sorry, not Krakot, with this McCall over here, specifically with the goal of baiting out this Helot. And Ed does respond, he reveals it, I throw some smoke down, and I actually succeed the face-to-face roll, which means we're going to get to some safety. I will then run these other ones forward, they're all basically fine. These ones will be forward fine as well. Because of where Ed has put the sniper, rather than putting it in a position like this, for example, I'm fine to just move all of these McCalls forward, which is great. We rush forward. The downside is that I have basically put them all in like the open now, and I'm going to have to actually do things with them in order to not make them sitting ducks on Ed's next turn. So this turn is, look, it's not exactly a comedy of errors, but it's the kind of thing that tries to happen when you're playing a faction like Tohaa and you just ball your fist up and break it into Spiral Core defenses. A lot goes not exactly right, but in short, I make pretty much exactly 0 progress on this flank. I think I'm able to get the delegate forward a little bit, the McCalls forward, and like that's basically it. All of the effort is pushing in this direction, and it just doesn't go great. I'm a little out of practice playing Tohaa. The first game coming back to Tohaa is always like this, where you just kind of forget how much you can do with Eclipse Smoke, and so I don't plan my attacks out. As Tohaa, you always want to kind of like plan your attacks, because you can move with such near perfect freedom, right? It's just very, very powerful. But we get some smoke down, and we push this triad up and around this direction under the cover of smoke, with the goal of launching basically a close assault on this position here, kind of using Ferroware. Now, things immediately get off to a kind of average start when, so there's like a nice smoke grenade down here, and so I'm moving this link team up through here, and yeah, the smoke more accurately would be like there. I'm moving this link team up through this position here, and Ed just looks at it and goes, you know, I didn't think you'd give this to me, and reveals the Clipsos boarding shotgun that is sitting here, and templates the entire link with its boarding shotgun, which is not the first fight I wanted to have really take place in my turn. Now I do dodge, and I don't actually lose any models to the shotgun. I lose a wound on the Takwheel officer, and I lose the Symbiomate off the Sukwell Commando, but we are otherwise okay. And so, all right, let's spend some orders. This McCall team over here is in the second combat group. They move up, they throw some smoke, they get into this, they get into the central building there. They have to throw some more smoke to do so. One of them jumps the Clipsos, which has dodged out of the smoke at this point. It templates me. I actually spang the shot and I kill it, but I have no orders left. So we are in some really like awkward positions, right? Like kind of here, here, and here. Thank God for that template, because I'm able to at least guts the central McCall prone. But there's going to be like a mess of things in this position here that are really going to be vulnerable in Ed's turn. Still, the plan is intact, so we push on. Oh, by the way, in case it wasn't clear, sorry, this Symbio Beast is actually inside this crate. I've just put it here so that I don't forget that it exists. It's inside, not on the rooftop. Anyway, we then continue to push forward, and I at this point, the like awkwardly placed smoke, where I haven't really thought about how things are supposed to go or where things are. I've just been like question mark, question mark, question mark, Ferroware, because this thing is revealed. We move the Sukwell Commando prone around here, and from about this point here, she takes a face-to-face roll with the Hilot. And I have positioned the smoke in a way where, because I'm dumb, I just couldn't quite take that fight from a position where I was in cover. Now, Sukwell Commandos are still quite good at taking engagements at short range, because they have Burst 3 Breaker Pistols, and I still have the link intact. She has Mimetism, BS-13, she's firing 4 shots in good range with those pistols. If I was not in cover, or if I had my Symbiomate still, this would be actually a great face-to-face roll. But I don't have either of those things, and so Ed needs 11s to hit me, and he crits me twice with his Helot, which is the usual and expected result of trying to fight Ed's Helots. Like, I don't even have a Vietnam flashback at this point. It just kind of happens, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, that's normal. I am inured to this at this point. Yep, yeah, failed 3 saves. The Sukwell Commando is extremely dead. This is not how I wanted this turn to go. So at that point, I basically the entire rest of the turn is spent spending orders on the Takwheel officer, who just like vibrates angrily in this spot here until she kills the Helot, and then just goes for it. She just takes a face-to-face roll with the Kriegel agent, remembered it eventually, and puts it, get lucky and put it down as well. This is 2 dice 14s to 1 dice 13s. Like, that's a very mediocre turn 1 face-to-face roll, and then pulls back to here. But this is this is really not like I've killed two things, and we use a McCall to take out like we've killed the Clipsos, we've killed the Healot, we've killed the Kriegel, we've killed the crazy beast that I'd use a McCall to do that. McCalls are very good at killing QAZ creatures because they knock their CC down to the point where the QAZ creature has to crit to win the face-to-face roll. So in terms of actually putting offensive damage into Spiral Core, like getting 3 kills is not terrible, particularly given I've claimed a fair bit of board space, which really just means extended myself into vulnerable positions. But I have lost way too much. Like losing as Tohaa, the circumstances under which you like the things that you have to do that are just a little bit wrong to lose a symbiomated symbio armored trooper to enemy fire on turn one. Like you have to work. You have to work to suffer that kind of casualties, in addition to the wound on the tack wheel officer. So I think in terms of total material, I have lost more than Ed on this first turn, which is not a great way to start. And Ed, for his part, is like, oh, the ravening hordes are descending upon me, but he just needs to hold his ground, right? And so the step for Ed is to shore up this flank, and a Drow will take care of that. So this Drow, which is in a duo at this point, it just moves out and around here, and it just pops to windows and then backwards, and it just kind of hops its way along here, and in doing so, it kills my Kaota Specialist, and it will come around here, and it will kill it will kill and then drop to dead because it's regenerating trooper, the Tack Wheel Officer, and it will put down a McCall that is hanging out in this position here, and then it will basically just pull back to here. Now, in pulling back to here, it makes what it does is it makes a dodge. It prompts a McCall that had been hanging out here to dodge out and around, and it just dodges. It moves and then dodges to get clear of the flamethrower. It goes to here, and as the last order of the turn, it elects to enter suppressive fire. And so I fire a contender at it, and I actually hit, which triggers its symbiomate, but the Drow passes its guts roll and stays in suppressive fire. Otherwise, there's just a little bit of movement in this position. In this position here, rather. So this Healot is going to actually move around to here. It will get discovered by one of these McCalls in this building when it does, but Ed is totally fine with that. So as we roll into my second turn, we can see this McCall team here is, you can see that it's relinked. I relinked it at the end of my last turn for basically for defensiveness. Strictly speaking, that means I think that this McCall had a +3 to its discover roll against the Healot. Didn't matter, it rolled a 9, which succeeded. We have the delegate in here, we have my lieutenant that's moved up to this position here, and then we have just nothing here anymore because everything went to this position here and then died. So with very, very little force left to kind of do anything in this position here, I really can't make an attack. I've consigned myself to not being able to activate this button. Ed pressed it with the Drow last turn, so that's going to be 1 point for him. The best I'll be able to do is if I have like a spare order, I will move these Preceptor teams forward, which I do. 10 inches of movement gets them a long way forward, but they won't be able to do anything this turn. So we have all of our resources here still, which we are going to use to attack. So, once again, in the vein of making things happen, we break this McCall team so it's impetuous, so that this McCall can move forward and flamethrower the Healot. The Healot will submachine gun him in return, and both will die. Is that ideal? Well, I traded a 13-point model for a 9-point model, but I needed to kill that 9-point model, and I was doing it using an impetuous activation rather than an order, which is a good example of a productive order. However, I really can't move either of these two McCalls particularly far forward because there's a diplomatic delegate hanging out back here, and I would just be asking to get both of them isolated, which I don't want to do. So this is an example of how, like, impetuous activations aren't orders. Your opponent is going to do things to prevent you from making use of them, but they are still a resource which is useful. Now, I am feeling at this point sufficiently threatened by the potential for Ed to make a last turn rush that I decide, look, we're going to continue to try and press the attack. We're going to play this very aggressively. And so, but most of this turn is spent on this link team here, which we remind you consists of a Tagma Schemer, a Sukwheel HMG, and a Kaota Specialist. So fairly lightweight, but the Sukwheel does have both a Symbiomate and a Symbio Bomb. And basically they yeet up this alleyway here with support from the Lieutenant Tack Wheel and the McCalls basically doing some things like laying smoke. This McCall that impetuous forward died to a Healot. We do impetuous this McCall forward and dodge. No, he just makes it through. He just runs the gauntlet and he makes it through the delegate's zone of control, and then spends a couple of regular orders. I think he doesn't do the impetuous, but he does do a regular order and a dodge. So it's move, regular order, dodge into zone of control, move and just manage to spang she misses the hit, around into CC, at which point I will die, but I will kill the delegate. I do that firstly because I need to kill the delegate, and secondly because that completes Predator, which is a nice ding, 1 point on the scoreboard for me. Otherwise, this team just aggressively attacks forward, and we will have reasonable results. We will be able to do some damage with the Sookwell HMG. We're able to push forward, take some space. We, move through a few things back. Nothing really particularly outstanding, but we will end up occupying kind of like this space around here, which will present a roadblock for Ed to deal with the next turn. Otherwise, most of what we're doing this turn is some fairly aggressive Ferroware attacks with our Group 2 Lieutenant, using his 2 Lieutenant orders. I love doing this, by the way. This is one of my favorite pieces in Tohaa. It's just a Tack Wheel Officer, Lieutenant, unlinked. Just 2 Lieutenant orders running around, laying down smoke and shooting out Ferroware. The thing is just an absolute utility monster, and it's going to go after it'll kill the second Kriegel agent, and it's going to go after the Tagma Schema Sniper, but it will be a bit too difficult to kill. I do some other stuff. I successfully put down, there is the K1 Combi Rifle, what's it called? A Cosel Engineer in this room here. We'll put that down before eventually pushing back to this direction here. That is about all that we accomplished, but that is still a few more kills. Like Ed is hemorrhaging order groups at this point. He'll condense his troops back down into a single combat group, which I think only has 7 orders to spend. And we've pushed through the helots, which is something I would rather just not have done. Like, it took so many orders and so many resources to do that, but we have stripped away the defense. So with 7 orders, Ed is now in a position where, again, for him, most of his resources are now over here. We have just the Draal. What happens to the Draal? Now, the Draal is intact but has nothing to shoot. Most of Ed's resources are otherwise over here. So this is determined to be this is a Nima Sitar turn, basically. And at this point, I am terrified that Nima will just like walk forward and symbio bomb my lieutenant to isolate him, because I don't have chain of command. My chain of command was killed in this hellscape over here on the first turn, so that would be very bad for me. But instead, what Ed does basically is relatively consistently just moves around and just shaves off some pieces around here. So he uses endgame from the symbio bomb to kill the Tagma Schema. He engages and puts prone ships the symbiote off, weathers the symbiote bomb, and puts prone the Sookwell Commando, and then pulls back to kind of like a central position here, where we have the Draal unlinked on the defense, and then Nima, the bioengineer, that's the Tagma Lieutenant, and the Kael'tar Specialist as an Assault Haris team, with the expectation that the Draal is going to go down. So rolling into my third turn, there are very few impetuous orders left to take, because almost every McCall in this part of the table is dead. This one will impetuous. He'll impetuous around to here, and then it'll dodge onto the objective, along with this diplomatic delegate who pressed the button last turn. But this McCall is dead. This McCall is dead. There's one McCall sitting in here, the one that survived the Clipsos shotgun, and she is staying where she is, because she is on that objective, and I do not intend to get her killed. So there is strictly speaking, there is one impetuous order, which is productive, gets me onto a zone. This will not matter, it will not affect the game. Ed decides not to make a run on this zone on his final turn, but I do get one more model onto this zone using this beacon using an impetuous activation, which is fine and good. So this turn we have just enough orders, and we have a couple of objectives. The first is, to the extent that we can, secure the central zone. And so my lieutenant is basically making a pair of cautious moves to get past Overwatch Nima Sitar, and then just run onto the objective and go prone. Cool. Okay, look, you know what? That's Ferroware. That's still very dangerous for Ed. It will project a fairly large zone. Sweet. Everything else is spent making attacks with the Preceptor. I have exactly one thing I do where this McCall here is going to throw smoke through to there, and then these boys will go. And I love Preceptors. They are an absolute joy to play. I just love playing Preceptors. They are harder to use I think in N4 than they used to be in N3, mostly because they are more expensive, because we have to pay for Super Jump on the actual Preceptor. But who cares? When you get these boys into CC, it's just incredibly fun. It's like an Uberfell Commando that is fairly costed, but has like real chunguses as the pupniks. And so they're going to push up and around here. They are going to get both of them into CC and take out the Cosel Engineer with boarding shotgun. I will go dogged on one of them in the process. Then we'll push around here, and they will absolutely gank the ever-living crap out of that Drow. Again, both of them get into CC. I just choose not to make it a face-to-face roll by attacking the one that the Drow doesn't attack. They all die at that point because Nima is there overwatching them as well. But with the Drow down, I can O12 Prestige to pull the under cover of smoke. I can pull the Preceptor back to on this in cover on this button, and that is basically as good as I'm going to get. I've done two more, like, or Ed's order pool is now very low. I have models on all three buttons, including this one is a Symbio Armor model, which will have the 2 wounds. And then I have my Lieutenant with its Ferroware prone behind, there's a car here, prone behind a car on this side. So this is as good as it's going to get. And Ed goes into the tank a little bit on his final turn and determines that it is possible for him to play not just to a draw, but to a win. And to do that, what he's going to need to do is score a number of kills and have basically everything go correctly. But this Link team can move out and around here. If he can kill this Preceptor, kill everything on this objective, and then get models onto both of these, he will be on 6 points, which is more than I will have at that point. And he has just enough orders to make it happen. Unfortunately, on like the first move out, the Preceptor survives the face-to-face roll with Nima. She's burst 5, BS 13. He attempts to throw smoke, doesn't get wounded though. The smoke cancels out enough of the face-to-face roll that he just goes prone, staying on the objective. And the McCall that's been hanging out in this room, throwing smoke last turn, makes a dodge around to here. Now, Ed has no choice but to push forward. His order count is too thin, so he does so, and the Flamethrower doesn't touch Nima, but it takes out both of the ancillary units in that fire team. And again, Ed had only enough orders to basically be forced to move in this straight line direction. That puts paid. The sacrifice of this McCall, and it absolutely, you better believe it, it dies in that exchange. That sacrifice puts Ed out of contention for the win. But he can bring the game as close as he can. So Nima Satar is basically going to push around to here. She will eventually kill the Preceptor. She will get into close combat with the Lieutenant. She's taking QAZ creature attacks all the while, but she's able to survive those. Finally, she gets into CC with the Lieutenant. Viral pistols him, actually puts him to unconscious. I forget to regenerate him, but let's just assume that I failed. Which, if she'd survived this, would put her on... If she was in the central zone, the score would have been 4-all, because I'd done my classified already, and I had everything on this button. But she actually dies finally. She takes, I want to say, yeah, two rounds of attacks from the QAZ creature, plus a variety of other attacks, and she does go down on the final swing in. So there was a potential here for a draw, but alas, was not to be. The end result is nobody is controlling... No, yes, this Preceptor... actually ends up, I think he dies. Everything dies over here, but everything dies, which means at the end of the game, Ed has 1 point for this button pressed. I have 1 point for my classified, and then 3 for these, which puts the score at 4-1 in Tohaa's favor. And frankly, that is a pretty expected outcome when Ed and I play, in terms of like, these are hard fights. Playing Tohaa into Spiral Core and vice versa, you are playing an all-wound army into Ferroware. As Tohaa, you're playing into Helots. As Spiral, you're playing into more symbiomates than you have access to. The sides are, I would say Tohaa are broadly favored if you're able to account for the Helot effect, if you're able to play around the Helots in some way. But yeah, it is a savage matchup for both sides. Now, was I able to make productive use of impetuous orders? Yeah, I think absolutely over the course of the game. But was this what would that be? Was this a 23 order list? Fuck no, it absolutely was not. Over the course of the turns, I was generally able to get maybe like 1 or 2 orders worth of productive use. Remembering that these McCalls could just have been linked and move linked. I was able to get a little bit of value out of the impetuous activations. Now, I think being more sensible about this, there is actually a very effective Tohaa combat group configuration where you put just a couple of McCalls unlinked in combat group 2. And what those ones do is they use their impetuous activations to throw smoke grenades for your more effective assault Harris teams. They don't try and run in this like, everyone links and then you break the links and everyone impetuouses. You plan to have them impetuous and you have them there specifically to cover and run escort for an assault Harris team. That, however, would not have fit the brief of as much impetuous as I can fit in the list. And while technically this was not as much impetuous as I could fit in a Tohaa list, it was as much impetuous as I could reasonably proxy because I needed those Krakots to pretend to be McCalls because I was running out of monkeys to pretend to be McCalls. Would Krakots have been good in this matchup? Yeah, they would have been really, really good. Like they would have like not having to deal with Eraser and being able to spec fire onto Spiral Core lines would have been just a tremendous luxury. Like, if the Krakots had been there and rolled up anything remotely good for meta chemistry, I would have been in such a better position. But didn't really have that as an option. Played this list as it was. I was happy with it, but I will not play it again. It's kind of leaning into a meme. And there are much better ways to do things as Tohaa, including, for example, running just those couple of unlinked McCalls, which actually do give you productive use of your impetuous orders. As for Ed's list, I really liked it. It is really bridging the gap more and more between Tohaa and Spiral Core. The fact that the list now, the way that Ed had to deploy it to respond to my preceptor, he ended up really just running like 2.5 triads. But the fact that the list actually just has 3 good quality triads, all of which have smoke, all of which have ferroware, all of which have close assault, all of which have some kind of useful like armor piercing or equivalent firepower. That's super cool. Like I really liked that. Spiral Core players who are looking to do things that are a bit outside the norm, or perhaps a bit closer to the norm, because if you want to play outside the norm, you run like some of that IGL insanity with the triple impersonators. But just a really like solid, stable, like second or first, if the case may be, Spiral Core list. I really liked what Ed was playing. I also don't really think there's a scenario that it can't play in. Like Ed could have played this in Biotech 4. They've had 3 Harry's teams. You just have to move the Helots forward and you're fine. So, yeah. Liked the list, liked the Spiral Core list, did not love the Tohaa list, but it was in response to a challenge, and I found the challenge particularly compelling. So, Rob from Brisbane, thank you very much for that. Coming up next on the channel, I hope to have either some Conquest Last Argument of Kings content, or at some point, maybe next week, a Cosmoflot game. We have one of those long overdue. I've been wanting to play that for some time now, hoping to get to that relatively soon. As always, if you enjoyed this, you can support the channel via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description or by becoming a channel member. Big thanks to everyone who has already. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.